Hello there. Pochettino is dead, long live Enzo Maresca at Chelsea Football Club, but a lot of people are going to be asking, why the hell Enzo Maresca? Well, let's talk about that. With Pochettino leaving Chelsea, a lot of it seemed to come down to the style differences between Pochettino and what the ownership, Clear Lake, are looking for. Clear Lake have been building a squad for a possession style of football, something like you've seen at Arsenal with Mikel Arteta and Manchester City under Pep Guardiola, but Mauricio Pochettino likes to play a transition game a bit more. He looks on individual attacks rather than passing plays that are made by the coach, and he wanted players like Conor Gallagher in his side because Gallagher makes a lot of sense for what Pochettino likes to play, what ideas Pochettino brings to the table, but Clear Lake, the ownership, have identified Gallagher as someone who doesn't really work in the sort of team they're trying to build and would make them a lot of money for FFP being an academy product, and so it's all pure profit for them. And so there was disagreements there between Pochettino and the ownership, and it's ended with Pochettino leaving. But why the hell have they gone for Maresca? Obviously, he plays that possession style of football that they've been building and looking for at Chelsea Football Club. But why him over other possession style coaches? Well, obviously one of the main candidates that people would have been looking at was Roberto De Zerbi from Brighton. Now, obviously, Chelsea have dipped into Brighton quite a bit since Clear Lake have come in. You know, they've signed scouts, they've signed Graham Potter, they signed players like Marc Cucurella, and so obviously Roberto De Zerbi seems like the natural guy they'd go to. He plays the football that they're looking for, and you know, they've got a lot of appreciation for Brighton there, so they would have been watching a lot of what De Zerbi's doing with players that they're signing, working with guys that they've hired. So why Maresca over De Zerbi? Well, one of the things that was reported was Chelsea wanted a manager that not only plays the possession style they're looking for, but also will shore up the defence, you know, bring a defensively solid style, which then also scores a lot of goals. Roberto De Zerbi, he's lost a few games here and there, like 3-4-0 during his time at Brighton, and clearly that's not something that appeals to the Chelsea ownership. Whereas Enzo Maresca had the best defence in the Championship last season, and a lot of that comes down to the shape that he plays in-game and how he likes to set up his team defensively. And I'll talk a bit about that more when we have a look at how Chelsea could look under Maresca, but there's something that De Zerbi wasn't really great at. Granted, his defensive style would probably work better with better players, but as far as it goes, he lost a few games big, whilst Maresca had the best defensive record in the Championship last season, as well as getting the second best offensive, second most goals. And so Maresca brings that defensive solidity that Chelsea want at the club, but also scores a lot of goals and plays the style they want. And so that's why they've gone for Enzo Maresca over likes of De Zerbi, who were also linked, playing that sort of style. And so when you look at the numbers, they had the second most possession in the Championship last season, 61% possession per game on average, only beaten by Russell Martin, who, if anyone has watched Russell Martin's football, is dreadful. It is dreadfully boring. Like, honestly, he's the kind of manager that would rather just pass it around for 90 minutes than potentially concede a goal, because, you know, if you don't lose the ball, you can't concede, right? But then you got to take chances if you really want to succeed, and Russell Martin isn't really a taking chances kind of guy. He's very much a pass it, be slow, be safe sort of manager. And so that's the only guy that averaged more possession than Maresca last season in the Championship. Obviously, Maresca, better defensive record, more goals, and won the league. Granted, with a better squad, but still, you know, achieving better than Russell Martin, whilst also having a lot of possession himself. And a lot of that possession comes where you want it. They had the second most touches in the opposition third last season in the Championship, and so a lot of that 61% possession is coming in the attacking area of the pitch for like Leicester last season, and obviously what he's going to be trying to bring to Chelsea. And so That's what you want to see. A lot of the pressure and, the attacking impetus is in their final third. They're boxed in, they're fighting to try and keep Maresca's team out, where they're passing it around, sort of waiting for their opening, always keeping the pressure on, having the ball high up the pitch, far away from their own goals, so they're safe from conceding, and they've always got the pressure on the other side. And so that's obviously something that has appealed to Chelsea. Another thing is, Maresca makes a lot of sense for the players that Chelsea have. I'm going to talk again later a bit more about that, but you're going to see vast improvements, most likely from the likes of Enzo Fernandez in the roles that Maresca will have his team playing in. Like, he suits the squad that Chelsea have now, plus anyone else they try and bring in, which is something that was really an issue under Pochettino last season. Pochettino struggled with a lot of the newer signings. The players he liked were the likes of Gallagher, who Clearlake didn't really see a long-term future for, but the likes of Enzo Fernandez, who cost them a lot of money that they clearly put a lot of stock into, Pochettino couldn't really figure out a way to get him into the way Pochettino wanted. And so that's another thing that goes into Maresca's column of this is why they want him. Obviously, there's going to be some doubts there. Maresca had a failed stint at Parma prior to Leicester, and one of the reasons he failed there, that he said himself, was they signed 14 new players at Parma that season. Now, that's a lot of players, and, it's understandable that his reasoning was, with all these different players that hadn't played together, they didn't have the relationships on the pitch that a normal side would, and so he struggled to bring his new ideas into the team and integrate them whilst having to try and build up relationships on the pitch between players because they never really played with each other. Obviously, at Chelsea, they've signed a lot of players recently, and so there's going to be a similar sort of atmosphere at Chelsea, but less so because they've now had at least like a year all together to play and sort of learn how each other plays on the pitch, and so that's obviously going to be something that goes against Maresca, but also there's a bit more leeway there at Chelsea. They've had that extra year compared to the team he had at Parma, and so maybe that's enough for him to get over that hurdle, and he would have learned obviously from that experience. Another thing is just his general inexperience as a coach. This is his second first team job was Leicester. Chelsea would be his third, and so he's never really worked with a lot of players, and especially not big players that like Chelsea are going to have. There was issues with Graham Potter, which was all sort of stemmed from the fact that he sort of struggled to get the players on his side, on board with him. He'd never managed these big names before, and so when Potter came in, there was sort of talk behind the scenes that the players were kind of ridiculing him a little bit, like behind his back, where he was like this hipster coach that had come in from Brighton with some really interesting ideas, but he hadn't won anything. He didn't have the CV, he didn't have the pedigree, and so they sort of struggled to take him seriously as such because, they saw themselves as bigger than him, and so it's like, why should we listen to this guy? And he didn't really figure out how to get over that hurdle as such, whereas Enzo Maresca, he will come in inexperienced. He hasn't won a lot. Sure, he's got a championship title, but what the hell is the championship title to, World Cup winner Enzo Fernandez, right? So that issue is also going to be there. But one thing that really goes in Enzo Maresca's favour is he's worked with Pep Guardiola. He was Pep Guardiola's assistant coach before this, and as we've seen with Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, he stepped in really inexperienced, and he had no issues with getting the players on side. He got rid of players that were like troublemakers in the changing room, and he really got everyone on his side. And just look at how good Arsenal are now. They were really struggling towards the end of the Wenger era. It didn't really pick up too much under Emery, other than making that Europa League final where they did get absolutely smashed by Sarri's Chelsea. And so Mikel Arteta comes in, really inexperienced, but really turns it around there. He gets the players on board, and they're playing phenomenal football. Really unlucky not to have won a title already. you're expecting them next season again, should be really up there and might actually win it again like next season, depending on how City are going. And so he's done a phenomenal job. Another guy is Vincent Kompany. He was very inexperienced. He stepped into a young Anderlecht side, had some really interesting ideas. Burnley take a punt on him, and he goes and wins 100 points in the Championship with Burnley. Yeah, he goes down with Burnley in his first season in the Premier League, but something that really went under the radar was towards the end of the season, they did have some really good performances under Kompany. And, it was too late for them to save their season, but it obviously enticed Bayern Munich enough to bring him in. And so you've got Arteta at Arsenal, he's done a fantastic job. Bayern are taking a punt on a ex-Pep acolyte, giving him the reins to a huge team with the likes of Harry Kane there, to try and, bring his ideas and sort of believe that maybe his ideas can really work there. And now you've got Chelsea who are getting in Enzo Maresca, who also worked under Pep Guardiola, and he will have learned what these guys have when it comes to managing top players. He would have seen how Pep talks to them, sort of gets them on board. It's a bit different because Pep has that aura about him because of how much he's won, but he's going to have methods that Enzo would have seen firsthand and will hopefully be able to bring into the Chelsea locker room and get over the fact that he's so inexperienced with these sorts of egos and players. And so there's certainly doubts there, but they don't kill the idea of Maresca coming in. There's sort of, you can point to each thing and be like, yeah, but this might work in Maresca's favour. He might have learned this, he might have got over that. And so the doubts are there, but a lot of them can be explained away as why they won't really be an issue at Chelsea going forward. And so I'm going to take a look now and talk a bit about how Chelsea will probably look at lining up under Maresca, and talk about sort of how he really suits some of these players and how some of these players might actually have a lot better seasons under Enzo Maresca than they did under Mauricio Pochettino. So, as you see here, I've got Chelsea set up in a 4-2-3-1 to begin with. That's just to sort of give you an idea of what the team sheet will look like starting. This isn't really the shape that Maresca likes to play too much in-game, but what he does like to play, you never really see put down on the team sheet. And so this is like a normal formation that you'll most likely see on all the graphics, this is what Chelsea's setting up in. It'll be these sorts of players, but there'll be a different shape in-game. But this is something normal for you to see first, just so you sort of understand what players are going to be looking to start most likely. But this shape here, the 3-2-4-1, 3-2-5, whatever you want to call it, this is more likely what you're going to see once the game has started for Chelsea Football Club under Maresca. And so one of the big things he talks about on the Coach's Voice channel is the inverted fullback in his system. He loves to have an inverted fullback to come in and step into the midfield and, really increase their numbers in the middle there. And Marc Cucurella is the perfect player for that. He's done it a lot towards the end of the season. People talk about Pochettino had started to turn it around at the end. They went on a really good run of games towards the end. That all coincided with Marc Cucurella stepping into the midfield in this sort of role. Because what was happening was Enzo Fernandez got injured, and so they were playing Caicedo and Gallagher in the midfield. And Gallagher loves to run, he loves to push forward and try and steal the ball back, but that leaves a lot of space behind him in the midfield. And so Pochettino had Marc Cucurella stepping into the midfield, playing this role to cover the space left by Gallagher, and he thrived. It really worked well, and Chelsea's form really turned around when that happened. And so Maresca likes to have an inverted fullback, and right there you've got the perfect man for the job. Marc Cucurella already at the team, already sort of playing the role towards the end of last season. And so that's a man who you're probably going to see a lot of next season under Maresca and should really thrive. And Cucurella pushing forward means you're going to have this back three of James, probably Badiashile, and probably Colwill. And Colwill and Reece James really suit these wide centre-back roles because they've both got really good passing range, they're both really comfortable on the ball, and they're both good defensive players who can step out wide and defend against wingers. Colwill played a lot of the season at left-back under Mauricio Pochettino, whilst Reece James obviously is naturally a full-back. And so they can step wide, defend wingers, but also this sort of role gives them a lot more freedom to pass than they would normally have as a fullback. Because as a fullback, you're sort of caught in the corner where you've got your man down the line or a pass across to a centre-back. Usually are those your options, or try and beat your man. Whereas in this sort of role that these two are going to be in, you have a lot more passing options. You know, you've got your centre-back and your winger, obviously, but you can also play it all into the middle to the midfielders, or you're going to have more space out there to be able to play longer balls to the likes of Enzo and Palmer or Jackson going forward. And Colwill and Reece James really have that in their locker. At Brighton, that is exactly what Colwill was doing towards the end under Roberto De Zerbi, and he looked really good. There was a reason Brighton put in like a 45 million bid for Colwill after that season, because they recognised the talent he had, and it was in this sort of role for Brighton that he was playing. And so you're going to get Colwill back in the position, in the role that he was really thriving in. And Reece James started playing this role under Thomas Tuchel as well. Prior to his sacking, this is where he had Reece James, because he recognised as well Reece James really has the skill set to really thrive in that position. And so I'd expect that from Enzo Maresca, to have those two as your wide centre-backs where they can really utilise their skill sets, with Marc Cucurella pushing into the midfield like he has towards the end of the season, and creating this 5-man defence here, essentially, where you have the 3 centre-backs and the 2 defensive midfielders. So when Chelsea potentially lose the ball up front, you know, they try an audacious pass, which they lose or something, and the other team try and break quickly on an attack, you've got 5 defensive players there. Something which he talks about in the coach's voice is, you know, in the 4-2-3-1 formation, for example, you'll have 2 centre-backs, 2 defensive midfielders back, 4 men defensively, with your full-backs who have already pushed up and joined the attack. So you've got 4 men back in a 4-2-3-1. In a 4-3-3, you'll have 2 centre-backs and a defensive midfielder. Everyone else push forward. So only 3 men back in a 4-3-3. But in this formation, he has 5 men back. And that is what has led to Leicester having the best defence in the Championship this season, is because, yeah, they have a lot of players pushing forward, but when they lose the ball, they have 5 men back to defend. And at Chelsea, you've got 5 really good players there, so you'll really see them shore up at the back and concede a lot less next season, potentially because of this defensive shape that Maresca likes to use, that he's talked about publicly, about how you've got 5 defenders there, and they're all in roles which they suit perfectly. And then going forward, you'll see Enzo Fernandez push forward next to Cole Palmer there with the wingers and the striker. Something that you've got here is what they call a box midfield. Obviously, the 4 men there. And what's really beneficial about that is you usually play like 4-3-3s with a 3-man midfield, or like, I don't know, 4-2-3-1, you'll be playing a 2-man midfield. This gives you 4 players in the centre of the pitch. So you're going to outnumber everyone, essentially. And so that extra man makes it so much easier to pass it around, move it, keep the ball in the midfield, and sort of move up to the attack a lot easier because you outnumber them in the midfield. And then, because this is becoming a popular idea, you're seeing more people use 4 men in the midfield to try and counter this so they're not outnumbered. And so Maresca talks about his striker dropping back as well. And so the striker drops back, joins the 4 midfielders there, and then you have 5 men in the middle, so you're still outnumbering teams even if they try their own 4-man midfield. And Jackson is sure enough on the ball that he's shown that he could potentially have it in his locker, that he could drop deeper and play that. Or you could have Christopher Nkunku, when he's not injured, actually playing in this role himself, maybe. And he's obviously an ex-midfielder that's sort of pushed forward, and so he's going to be a lot more comfortable pushing back as well and helping out the midfield, so you've got more numbers there. Or they've been linked with the likes of Benjamin Sesko, potentially. Obviously, a man on Arsenal's radar, but someone like that would really suit this Chelsea team perfectly. But if not, Jackson has certainly shown that he could have it in him to be able to play this role well, and Nkunku would make perfect sense for that as well. And so, Enzo Fernandez was a man that really struggled under Mauricio Pochettino last season. Over 100 million for a player that, you know, Poch could never really find a position for him in his team. You know, he always seemed to play better with Caicedo and Gallagher rather than with Enzo Fernandez, which, when you're spending that much money on a guy who wins the best young player at a World Cup, it's not great. And so Maresca will get better numbers out of him, certainly. You saw last season at Leicester, Dewsbury Hall playing in that sort of role. He got 12 goals and 14 assists. Those are phenomenal numbers for a midfielder. And not to say that Enzo will get 12 goals and 14 assists next season. That's a big ask, but you'll probably see Cole Palmer pull that out like he did this season. And so Cole Palmer's numbers, he's playing in basically the same role, should stay really good, but Enzo should really improve, because in this more attacking role, you're giving him the freedom to attack and play these fantastic passes that he's shown he's got in his locker. You know, he's got some really good vision and passing range on him, and he's really good at spotting runs. But where the issues sort of came for him was he always needed to push forward, but then he was always leaving space where he needed to track back. In this formation, he doesn't have to track back as much because you've got Cucurella and Caicedo already covering the midfield behind him, so he's got a lot more freedom. And so you're probably going to see a lot more out of the £100 million signing Enzo Fernandez under Chelsea, under Maresca next season. Mudryk cost 88 mil. Madueke was an investment too, and you're probably going to see better output from them as well, because in this you've got so many players centrally that the opposition team will have to commit more men in the middle so they're not completely outnumbered there, which leaves less players out wide. So you've got these two really quick, really good technical dribblers in Mudryk, Madueke, and then some other players coming in. Willian Esteval from Brazil is coming in. He really excels out there. And so it's going to be a lot easier for them because they've only got one man they're going to have to beat, and then they're in a lot of space to be able to play a ball into the centre to all these players who are going to be attacking. And so you saw Steffi Mavdidi last season under Maresca get 12 goals and 6 assists. You know, those are really good numbers, and I don't think that's beyond Mudryk or Madueke really next season. I think they've both got the talent and the ability to be pulling out numbers like that next season, with all the added space they're going to have from all the central players sort of stealing the attention, and they're going to be able to beat their man, get into really good positions to play it into the centre, get a lot more assists, you know, and they can be the guys making the run for the other one to play to get a lot more goals. And so under Maresca, you're going to see a lot of improvement from these really expensive, talented players, because the roles that they're going to have in his team suit them a lot better and really plays to the strengths of this Chelsea team. And another variation of what this would be was Reece James pushing forward there instead of Madueke, and then you just have like an Axel Disasi or Fofana or whatever other defenders they decide to sign, making up the back three there. So you use the attacking talent of a Reece James or a Malagusto instead of Madueke there, obviously. And so, because Reece James is a fantastic crosser, he's probably the best crosser of the ball at the club. You know, he's able to beat a man himself. He's very dangerous going forward. Malagusto too, very dangerous going forward. And so you could see a variation where instead of having them play in the centre-back role, you see one of the wingers dropped and have Gusto or James pushing forward, or maybe even Colwill on the other side pushing forward. Not Colwill, sorry, Ben Chilwell. If Ben Chilwell doesn't leave the club, you could maybe see Ben Chilwell on that left side instead. But that's another variation of the team he could play. And then the last variation I just wanted to talk about a bit about is you see Romeo Lavia there in the midfield. He's been injured for almost the entire of last season, but Lavia is a really fantastic midfielder. He's really talented, really good player. And so if he's available, you might see this where instead of Cucurella pushing into the midfield, you play the two midfielders of Lavia and Caicedo there. And that means Cucurella would push back into the left centre-back role instead of the midfield. And that's where he played under at times at Brighton under De Zerbi. And funnily enough, Cucurella was playing really well in that sort of role. Chelsea bought him, loaned Levi Colwill to Brighton, and then Colwill ended up replacing Cucurella as the left centre-back at Brighton and was like the perfect replacement. And so you've got two guys here at Chelsea who both played at Brighton, both played in that left centre-back role, and both played really well there. And so you could easily see like a Romeo Lavia coming into the midfield, and instead of Cucurella inverting, you have him playing that left centre-back role where he really thrives as well. So he's a very versatile player, you know. He's a really good guy to have in your team. And so you could see that where instead of him pushing in the midfield, he plays out wide at centre-back. Obviously, you'd have Reece James pushing forward in this sort of scenario because you want to play like a Disassi or someone like that. You want a right-footed centre-back on the pitch so that you don't have all left-footers along the back. And so, yeah, there's a place for pretty much everyone in this Chelsea squad in Maresca's team. You know, you could have Nkunku playing one of these attacking midfield positions. If Gallagher doesn't leave, you'd most likely see him hit him in one of these two spots where Palmer and Fernandes are. You know, there's a lot of room to manoeuvre with his system, but the roles are going to be very similar, just the personnel all sort of have their own place in that team. It really suits what Chelsea have, and there's not really going to be anyone shut out unless, obviously, the ownership want to sell them. And so I think Maresca works really well with the players they've got already, let alone any signings that they're most likely going to make in the transfer window. And so you can really see, when you look at it, why Maresca was such a popular choice for Chelsea going forward. And so to summarise, you can see Chelsea, Maresca, he really suits the style that Chelsea want. He's really suits the squad they already have. You know, you're probably going to see a lot better seasons from players like Enzo Fernandez, Mykhailo Mudryk, Caicedo. You know, these players that Chelsea spent a lot of money on, they really suit Maresca. They really fit into the roles that he's going to have them playing in, and they should thrive under him. And so, even with all the doubts there are around Maresca, I think he's a really interesting pickup for Chelsea. And my advice for Chelsea fans would be, give Maresca a go. I think there certainly is some really good ideas there for the Italian. I think he really suits the squad, and he's a really out there shout, but I think there is a lot of logic to the madness Chelsea have got here, picking Maresca over other coaches, and he really could be the Arteta that Chelsea are looking for to really kickstart this Chelsea revolution, and in a season or two have Chelsea really pushing to try and win big trophies again, which is obviously where all the Chelsea fans are going to want to be. And so that's why I think Chelsea have gone for Maresca.